Welcome, everyone. This is a Life on Purpose Live. I'm Peter, your host, and we have an amazing topic for you today, challenging the content of your mind. Have you heard this idea around that you need to surround yourself with like-minded people? You need to read the articles, you need to, read the books that confirm that you're right and someone else is wrong. But what if that idea is limiting your growth? What if it's limiting your personal and professional growth? What if it's reducing your capacity to experience the world in an expansive way? There's a lot of research right now looking at this, seeing if we're creating echo chambers and reducing our capacity to communicate and impact others by surrounding ourselves with like-minded people. Before we get into this topic, go ahead and follow the channel and go ahead and give this video a thumbs up if it resonates with you. Our guest for today is Chesline Pierre-Paul, great friend of mine. We're going to have some laughs along the way, so we're going to take it lighthearted. She's a global impact expert that's a contributor at Brains Magazine and has been featured all over the world. I can't wait for her TED Talk to come out. I'm just kind of throwing that out there to her. She's probably in the background laughing right now. She's going to give us really some insight into what this means for both ourselves personally, but more so on the corporate side. If you're a business owner, if you are the leader of a team, how this idea of like-minded people and challenging the context of your mind can help you to grow. Welcome, Chesline Pierre-Paul. What's up, Ches?
I'm so good. I love the intro. I'm obsessed. And you're right. I was already laughing.
Right. So, before we dive into the topic, I didn't expand on your accolades too much because the list is too long, first of all. So I have to remember all of that and all these big words. So if you can you just, talk to our viewers, those who are watching, who you are, what you do for a living, and, your perspective on this topic of challenging the content of your mind.
Yeah, totally. So I would say the best way to describe who I am is to say what I do. And I'm really privileged that I get to work with, different minority CEOs, thought leaders, and global activists and help them create a legacy of impact. So I have three different ways that I do this with different organizations. And ultimately, the aim is to change the narrative around how business and activism are treated as separate and oppositional entities, and to create a new paradigm, let's say, of purpose-driven companies where being impact-driven maximizes your bottom line, but also your capacity to change lives, so that you don't have to choose between being profitable or transformational, and to change a conversation around, what it means to carry privilege, for example. So a lot of my investment is to take people that are the least expected to be leaders and to empower them into becoming thought leaders and developing a legacy of their generational wealth and generational privilege. So that's what I love to do. And my background has been a lot in working in different transdisciplinary sectors. So I've worked a lot with businesses, a lot with activists, a lot with grassroots, a lot with different kind of organizations, and stepping back, looking at what was missing in all those ecosystems and what are the missing connections that we've been denied historically because we're conditioned to function in silos and not necessarily holistically. So that's a little bit about who I am and what I do and what brings me to this space.
Awesome. Do you see why I didn't try to explain that? But like you and Lena have this thing about being multifaceted, multidimensional. And I'm trying
Yes.
to catch up with you guys. I barely speak one language as it is, and I know you speak quite a few. Before we dive into the topic, can you expand a bit on languages, our speech, how languages impact our ability to have diversity of, communicating with others, but diversity of thought as well in how we see the world?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, when you say a lot of the work that I've been doing falls under the umbrella of EDI, so equity, diversity, inclusion, anti-oppression, and other things like that. And as you're saying, when you say the word diversity, especially in a context, it almost becomes a thought stopper for a lot of people. And they don't really allow diversity to be a more complex reality. So back to what you were saying, diversity for me, it's many things, right? It's, let's say, when I'm doing business, for example, what am I doing business only according to the historical institutional legacies that I come from? So am I only interacting from a Western perspective, or are there any other level of knowledge systems that also permeate my thinking? So when you are diverse, you engage the world from different standpoints along the same continuum of human experience, and it makes you a more robust thinker and a much more elevated, global thinker also in your capacities. So diversity for me, it's so much more holistic. And when you think different ideologically, the way that you express yourself would also be synonymous with, all the differences that you're holding in your mind. So what you were talking about, challenging the content of your mind. So when you have a heightened capacity to do that, that's when you get to maximize what it means to experience human intelligence. So I know that Brené Brown and so many other researchers have talked about how, what qualifies us as intelligent in the human paradigm is our capacity to hold contradictory and paradoxical thoughts at the same time without breaking. Most of us, the way that we're conditioned is, as you were saying, right? Intelligence is something, is a level of validation that you get from like-minded people. So you have a commitment to only operating one way and one way only. So for me, when I look at diversity, is understanding how am I a stronger human being? How am I more empowered in whatever role or capacity I hold, because I'm fluid enough that I understand the extremes within my own thinking, and I'm not trying to demonize somebody who's not like-minded. And quite the contrary, I understand that the path to oneness is accessed through difference. So that's a little bit of, what diversity can mean for people. And in that way, it's so much more fluid. You don't need to identify as anything to claim diversity for yourself. And whatever work or legacy footprint or impact footprint you're here to establish, it gives you such a more winded perspective. You have more resources, more capital, more resources and opportunities. Yeah.
Right. No, that's beautiful. I'm hearing you really talk about diversity in a more expansive way than just the
Yeah.
textbook having to do with racial equality or something like that. That's
Hmm.
honestly what comes to my mind when I say that
Yeah.
word, even though that I know that's not what it means because that's what's been perpetuated, right? The use of
Exactly.
that word. I want to really dig into the topic of challenging the content of your mind, this idea of associating ourselves with like-minded people
Mm.
through different constructs, right? So to break it down to like make it really simple and easy, honestly, for myself, because I'm
Sure.
a I'm a simple-minded type of person. Now, when we look at this topic of challenging your thought process, or now challenging the idea that I need to surround myself with people that think the same, that go to the same school, that look like me, right? The
Hmm.
color of my skin, that maybe have an accent from the Caribbean or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Why is it that you think that people would automatically try to do that? Is that something from our tribal nature? Is
Mm.
that a construct of socioeconomic patterns? Is
Mm.
that something within our biology? Why is it that we only seek out what we know, or why is that like the predominant thing that happens to us as human beings?
Yeah, I mean, I love the question, and I have two words that come to mind. So, colonial conditioning. When we live in a system, that's what it is. It's systemic, so it's a holistic thing, and we don't know how far deep we are within, that construct until certain things hit us. So, oftentimes, we like to perceive ourselves as, open-minded people until we meet the edge of our own resistance, and we encounter something or somebody that triggers us and challenges us. And that's when we can truly measure the quality of our alleged, open-mindedness. So for me, I would give you an example, as you said, to keep it simple and relatable. So I've done a lot of work with activists and activism in regards to what we call anti-oppression slash anti-racism, anti-coloniality. And, something I was telling people, I've been telling people for a little while now, but if you qualify as a leader, you need to be the one who's chasing people or are the opposite of you in the same space or conversation. So if you are fighting for human rights and social justice or anti-oppression, as a leader, my question to you is, when was the last time that you were sitting across from a white supremacist, for example? And so here it breaks a paradigm, because if I'm doing the work fighting for justice, why would I be in conversations with people who are denying us that, birthright of ours? But the thing is, where you have the greatest capacity for impact and transformation is where there lies the greatest resistance in regards to who you are, what you represent in this world, and what part of the system you inhabit, right? So if you only preach to the choir of your peers that are already converted to your ideologies and your way of engaging the world, there's no capacity for transformation that can be properly leveraged. And so we get seduced by our own fragility in that way. So for me, it's especially looking at it from the perspective of people who are change agents, people who are world leaders. The logic of mind that we need to integrate is, who was conditioned to hate me on sight / me and or my work. And this is the kind of ecosystem I need to become extremely fluent in. Because when you take something that was meant to destroy ideologically you and your peers, and you're able to help that person fall in love with what they were conditioned to hate, is when you truly change not only humans, but generations. Because those people have children, they have families, they have peers, they have industries also that they are sustaining through their hatred. And so you being able to bridge the gap that was thought to be, irredeemable on some level, that's how you truly become an agent of impact. So when I talk about like-mindedness as opposed to other-mindedness, that's the logic of thinking that I am. And even for you on a personal level, how much can you be touched by something that validates everything about you, including your own fragility? Even on a human interpersonal level, that's the best way to guarantee your own death on a functional level, or ideologically or existentially, because you only validate the things about you that you choose to be secure about. And so there's also the counterpart of that, is we don't realize how we've been conditioned to hate on so many levels, and how our language becomes hateful when we face somebody who disagrees with us. Few of us have been know how to deal healthily with dissent, and we think that consensus is the ultimate form of agreement between humans. But what about knowing how to hold somebody in love and esteem and in humanity, even when you don't stand for the same things ideologically? Or else your behavior is conditional. For me to be seen as fully human and validated in my humanity, I need to be on some level a replication of your ego. So it's interesting how a lot of mechanisms in our minds are warped, because we're conditioned to hate on sight, the thing that triggers some level of fragility in our egos.
Wow, that felt so good. I can't lie. Just the truth be told, Shez and I have these conversations via WhatsApp on our running podcast series that we do with each other, and I just feel so filled um, by how you explain that, and I wanna dive into something you said in the beginning, right? Not to discredit everything that you expanded on, but to really talk about the position that you explained when you said you come up to the edge of your fragility. I
Mm,
think that's a really good analogy, right? Because you can do yoga, you can drink green tea, you can you can spend time in silence all day,
mm,
but spend 2 weeks with your family,
mm.
right? And all of that gets thrown out, right?
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
a few people may understand what I mean when I say, maybe it's just me, I don't know. Um, but let's talk about that for a bit, the edge of
Yeah.
your fragility. Why
Mm,
is that important to understand, that when you come up to that resistance, when you come up to that edge, most people run away from it, right? What
yeah.
should we do when we are faced with that fragility, when we're faced with that challenge, when we're faced with someone else's opinion? Should we keep excluding them from the group? Should
Mm,
we add that to the group? And how do we go about doing that?
mm.
As difficult as that is, how do we approach such a thing?
No, I love that. I mean, I'm thinking of what happens if we don't know how to deal with our fragility when it's stretched so far. And I feel that we fall into the risk of becoming the thing that we hate. So let's say you have a family member, right, that has a very bigoted way of interpreting the world. And when people think like that, as our friend Brenda, told me at some point, she said there's a point in the conversation where you change status from a person and you become a non-person in their mind. So if you're gay, if you're queer, if you're black, if you're this, if you're that, there is a level of pre-qualification where some people feel justified in removing your capacity to be treated as fully human. And when you don't know how to deal with your own fragility, you become more like that. You become a person who is producing evidence by way of justification to feel more heightened in their ego through their denial of somebody else's humanity. So when you talk with somebody and you feel triggered, instead of wanting to run away and take to the heels and then create this very extensive narrative about why that person is less than, according to the standard of your own ego, your fear, your insecurities, and your fragility, the better thing to do for yourself is to get curious about it. Why am I triggered? Because for the same event that could have occurred with somebody else in a different conversation, somebody else would have laughed at the same comment or at the same level of interaction. So the way that you're reacting in this moment, whilst valid, is not the only way to encounter your fragility. So the things that make you laugh make somebody else cry. So in the moment where you feel a certain type of way, is to dig deeper within that narrative to encounter a hidden truth about yourself, because ultimately it's never about the other person. The other person is an unschedulable teacher, but they're not the enemy. And it's easy to want to dismiss them as, non-person or non-people. So this way we have a shield that we can use around our own fragility, and we don't get to be as self-empowered as we could have been. So when I'm in conversation with said family member and I feel all the feelings that I have, I'm not denying them, and I allow myself sometimes just to sit with it for a minute, because not all level of intelligence can be reasoned. But then when that moment passes, I don't want to be limited in my capacity to experience joy or peace based on who is sitting across from me in a conversation. And I was talking about this with my dad the other day too. And it was saying, your peace needs to be an artifact in your life that is unconditional. Because if you are trigger happy, fragility wise, it means that based on whom you're talking this way, we can already predict the level of peace that we would choose to be entitled to. That's not the kind of life that I want, where I'm enslaved to the level of emotional intelligence that my, level of intimacy with somebody emotionally can provide me. So I want to be a truly free human. I want to be a truly empowered human. And it means that there's some level of challenges in my life that I need to reframe. So fragility doesn't have to be the enemy, same as the other person who created the opportunity for fragility in my life doesn't have to become my enemy. And I know there was this quote on IG that I love that says, your enemies are your greatest spiritual teachers. And fragility is also part of that continuum. Yeah.
Wow. I love that. I mean, what I'm hearing you really talk about is that the edge of your fragility, when you feel that frustration, when you feel that challenge, when you feel as if your ideas about life and the world are being challenged by someone, really what they're showing you is an aspect of your limitation, right? That's really what I'm getting from that. And as we know already, you can use the analogy of like going to the gym and working out. When you reach the edge, right, the fragility of your muscle, which mine are kind of small right now, right? When you get it, when you're getting to the edge of that fragility, what you're really being told is, hey, this is where your limit is, and also this is where your growth lies.
Mm-hmm.
So on one side of it is your limitation, but on the other side of that is growth, it's
Mm-hmm.
expansion, it's a new way of seeing the world. And I think this is really important, especially in the work that you do for leaders, in understanding that when we exclude people and we have all of these special interest groups in our organizations, what we're doing is we're limiting our capacity to see the world in a more expansive way. we're limiting our ideas, we're limiting our teams. Can you
Mm.
talk about that a bit as we come up to the edge of our fragility,
Mhm.
right? Our limitation, the other side of it, and how that impacts leaders in the corporate world, in the business world, and in our teams?
Yeah, definitely. So let's say in a business setting, what this can look like is if you're launching a new initiative or a new project and you're looking to the same people in your team for new answers about bigger and better problems, it's going to, as the quote that gets attributed to Einstein, you re-engineer the same level of thinking to process a higher level problem. And so you don't have in-house yet harnessed or harvested the capacity yet to contend with something that is bigger than where you come from operationally. So when you apply this level of thinking is you need to look outside of your own ecosystem. Your competitors are facing the same problems. And oftentimes the difference between one and the other one is, efficient marketing or a very minute degree of differentiation. So if you direct your gaze very far away from your chosen industry, that's where you would be triggered into thinking in a much more expensive way because you're not trying to compete with the thing that is the closest to you. You're looking to the thing that is the furthest remote, and that gives you a lot of room to grow in. So I've had a lot of people, oftentimes what happens is they basically create a problem in house, but they think that it is unavoidable. So yes, we are, it's the first time in our mandate, for example, that we chose to commit to EDI, so equity, diversity, inclusion priorities. And it's not working, it's not this, and it's not that. And I said, and I listened to them, and I realized that all the people who engaged the conversation are all the people least equipped to deal with the answer. So that's why you need to look to external consultants at, on some level or things of that nature. But it's the logic of what is operationally convenient for people is not necessarily operationally appropriate or even operationally efficient. So we confuse what is comfortable and known with a level of efficiency. It just means that you do the thing quicker that maybe is a thing that you shouldn't do in the first place. So it's again needing to distance ourselves from the conditioning operationally that we have as a company and challenge ourselves enough to allow for the understanding that we have a legacy of not doing this work historically, however intelligent and gifted we may be, which is to say that what we are lacking here is a perspective and a framework. And it's the logic of, that level of logic makes it so that we try to reinvent the wheel. Then we discard an initiative or discard a project and we say, oh, we didn't hit our KPI, we didn't hit our, specific targets for this quarter. So the project is at fault. But we don't understand that the way that we approach newness or innovation or new market development opportunities is the reason why we set ourselves for failures in the encounter of a greater, market growth leverage. And James Clear in his book, Atomic Habits, I love him to pieces. And he has this quote along the lines of, we don't we don't rise to the level of our goals, we fall to the level of our systems. So oftentimes companies would do that mistake, right? They set the goal without the system. Then when the goal cannot be attained, they will blame the objective all along as opposed to the mechanisms that treated something that was a very valid organizational opportunity and turned it into a systemic opportunity for failure, right? So in a business setting as well, it translates, especially in the face of new project developments, new initiatives, organizational change. And, all businesses are called to encounter one or the other at some point, in their lives. So the question is, are you equipped, when it comes to your senior management, for example, to deal with organizational change? And if you don't know how to look outside of your own framework to look for greater and better answers to new emerging problems, you will, validate for yourself the self-fulfilling prophecy that, oh, this project was never going to work anyway. So we just got evidence of the thing that we anticipated. Yeah.
Right. You said a lot of times, especially in the corporate world or in the business world, we're looking at things like, oh, this is the simplest thing that we can do. It's the most comfortable. But it actually might be the least efficient thing that you could do right now. Like this is the last thing you should even be looking at.
Yes.
I love how you brought that in, talking about people building these objectives without systems. And at the end, when it doesn't work, they're looking at the objective like that's fault when they had no process to get to that objective. Can we do a switch on the same side now in the corporate world in our personal lives, right? If we don't challenge the content of our mind, if we don't build strategies in our personal lives, what catastrophes could there potentially be for us as human beings? Are there any of them evident in the world today? I'm just smiling because I see them every day. And then, like, how can we build strategies in our personal lives? What can we take away from this conversation to say, hey, even if I'm not in the corporate world, right? What can I do today to start implementing things to challenge my mind to, expand my ecosystem and become a more productive and efficient human being?
Yeah, I would say is, everybody has their own levels of dreams and purpose and ambitions. And the way to get there is to understand how fragile we are when we enter the unknown. So I can give you another example, even in parenting, right? So I co-parent a bunch of kids. I call them kids, but they're pretty grown, as they remind me every day. And let's say ultimately the outcome that you seek as a parent is to have this beautiful relationship with your child. But your operating default is when the child will make known to you certain needs and desires that exist beyond the level of your conditioning. You feel triggered and you act only in a triggered capacity. So it's the same thing where you have the desire, you're met with the reality that hits you in a different place than what you had anticipated, and then you use fragility as a default mechanism. The thing is, what happens after you feel triggered, right? Do you stay and do you linger within that conversation with yourself, or will you allow yourself to be challenged by the thing that you had least expected to get to the place that you most desire? And the kids, they teach me that every day, and in the smallest and in the biggest things, in terms of their career aspiration, what they want to do with their life, what kind of life they want to have, they want to work. Is that, just the things that we take for granted, you know a full functioning human that is an adult should do XYZ. And that's the prescription of conditioning. But if the child comes to you and tells you that actually what they truly want to do has nothing to do with, what where you come from, the expectations that were set for you before you were born, how do you deal with that? So when you apply the logic of challenging the content of your own mind is, when it comes to you looking to your wildest dreams and desires, are you treating the way that you take to get there as a conditional thing? Or are you being fluid enough that you get to being conditional in your processes? So for me, if the outcome matters more than the how, that's how I make sure that my dreams are inevitable, because I'm not trying to control how I build that relationship with my child. I care that I have a relationship with my child, and I allow my child to shift in the definition that I have given them, or in the vision or the perception of them that I had. I allow them to be more holistic and more whole than my pre-definition of them. But a lot of us is the way that we act contradicts our ability to get what we deserve. So it could be in a relationship with our children, it could be in a relationship with a partner. It could be in so many other areas of life. It could be in me wanting to get fit again, right? I wanted to look a certain way. Okay, but that's an arbitrary and an artificial, imperative that I've set for myself. Doesn't matter much more that I am healthy than it does that I subscribe to my definition of what I need to look like in the process of me getting healthy. So we get those things conflated and we create undue tensions in our lives. And that's when opportunities for our own fragility to manifest actually happen, because we created the tension that we don't know how to deal with. But then again, we're going to blame it on the goal as opposed to understand that our process is at fault here, right?
I love that. This is obviously true, right? A lot of times we have these big dreams of accomplishing a specific goal, going out in the world and making these great changes. But as you say, our actions, the strategy that we built in our lives is actually contradictory to getting that goal. It's like we say we want to get somewhere, but we do everything not to get there. It's it's actually quite dangerous also for us to be in that state of mind, because it means that the border that we're running up to, the edge of our fragility, is actually us. It's us that's there. but we're looking everywhere else for the problem when it's us that's actually standing in our own way. And you describe some ways of how we can get out of our way. Um, One of them being to have the conversation, right? When you were
Mhm.
talking about the corporate self, and what about the conversation that we have with ourselves?
Mm.
What do we do with that? See, if it's possible, right? If we're going down this path that I'm following, Shez, you're leading me down this path right now, right? We're following this path, and when you come up to the edge of your fragility and you look on it and you see that the other side of your fragility is growth, but you
Mm.
are at the edge,
Mm.
how do you get out of your way? Yes, you
Mm.
can have these strategies and everything like that, but when it comes to, that self-talk, that conversation that we have with ourselves, how do we move in another direction from limitation to possibility?
Mm.
How do we do that?
Yeah, I would think of radical realness. So I will give you a couple examples. And it happens to me frequently when I'm with my kids, right? So the other day I was with my I was gonna say my best friend. He's also my best friend, my little brother that I co-parent. And sometimes something happens in conversation and I interpret his emotional reaction as something else. And I go and I create my own story, like Brené Brown talks about, right? So what I would do is I would create an opportunity just to go back and sit with him, because what I want is I want us to have this powerful bond that endures through the everlastingness of our lives. So if that's my outcome, but fragility pops up, right, and I get triggered, I react in a certain given way, I need to keep sight of what it is that I am aspiring towards, as opposed to what it is that I'm reacting against. And when I talk to him, for me, it's a suspension of belief, as we call it in literature. So I will allow for the whole story that I've pre-consolidated in my mind, I will allow that for a minute not to exist. And I'm just going to ask him straight up, when such a thing happened the other day, I had the feeling that you felt XYZ or whatever the case may be. And I will allow myself the opportunity to be affirmingly invalidated in regards to a story that my fragility chose to be committed to. And 99% of the time, I'm very creative, but you can be imaginative about empowering your demons as opposed to understanding reality. So those interactions with him always flip the script for me. And that's when I decide that fragility exists and it's taught me something. And for me, it created an opportunity to be radically real or realer about my feelings and to foster a higher level emotional intimacy with the people that I choose to make a lifelong commitment to. So that was an example. But what's more significant is, even though we're talking about two people, 90% of the exchange happened internally. And that happens to a lot of us in our own exchanges and relationships. 90% of the conversation is, for us by us, at the exclusion of whatever partner we may have as a participant to the exchange. So when you know how to sanitize your thinking by challenging the content of your mind, interrelationally, you are so much more empowered to experience life at a heightened level, because the noise that we produce in our lives, that we treat as a version of reality, then we have a very safe way of depowering a lot of the tension that we are the architect of. So when I talk with them, oftentimes we end up laughing because I can't believe how far deep I went into my own rabbit hole. But the whole time, he was an unwilling and unknowing protagonist in the chess show. And oh, he said that. And when you turn around, and I had all my interpretations and I codify my interpretation in a very rigid way. So when I come to him, I'm not neutral, I'm extremely fragile. So for me, this is one such example. Another example could be going back to wanting to reclaim your health and your fitness, right? For example, for me, it's okay, I want to be healthy, I want to be this, I want to be that, but then I will impose, a very superficial imperative onto myself that became a strain. So, okay, well, you need to wake up at 5 a.m. and do this. And if you don't do it at that time, it invalidates whatever training or workout or physical conditioning or fitness that you may get done throughout the day. So you create those impossible constructs, right, that are so rigid because you care more about what you look like than about what it feels like, or you care more about what you look like than what you're actually doing. And that's again the thing where the best friend of your fragility is always going to be your ego. So my ego says, when I do the thing that will set me free, I still need to behave like I'm in bondage. So I still need to feel unnecessarily uncomfortable, or I still need to add, that other level of an onus. And so that's the reason why that tension becomes all the much more domineering in our lives and also unproductive. So for me, it's okay. I have this ideal, and that's where I'm at today. And I feel such and such way about that. But then I'm going to allow for a minute for an alternate discourse to give me answers, as opposed to go back to my darkness to teach me about the light that I'm trying to step into.
Shez, you don't know how many times that has happened to me. Where I created this entire story inside of my head about what happened. That it seemed like you know some of these stories of mine, Shez. You're talking about, yeah, she looked at me like that when she came around the corner, and why did she
Exactly.
stay there? Or
When she was bending over, I'm sure she was thinking about what happened on Tuesday.
the other person has no clue. They're just
No
going
idea.
about their business. You're creating
Exactly.
this dialogue, and what you say, he's a protagonist in the shit show. It's something that we can laugh about now, but it can have, of course, these
Ooh.
long-term issues in our
Oh
lives,
yeah,
right? And
big time.
people can go around years with these stories. I won't say her name, but a friend of mine, I think it was like a year or two we didn't talk or something. I was in Saudi
Mm,
Arabia at the time, really busy with my military career and stuff, and we had spoken shortly after I came back, and she was angry with me, and I didn't even know for two
mm,
years.
yeah,
She was mad at me. It's like,
yeah.
yeah, the last time we spoke, you said this and that. And I was like, I haven't thought about that not one time. And she actually got more upset that that I wasn't even thinking about what was stressing
Mm,
her out for 2 years. So
mm,
there's this dialogue that goes on in our head, which she said, about 90% of that is all going on in our internal monologue.
yeah.
And I think that's an important thing to understand, even in the corporate setting that you described before in our personal lives. Even if you think about it in a corporate setting and you have these special interest teams who make all the decisions, but they're not
Mm,
inclusive, well, what's
mm,
happening is you're not having the conversations with the people that you're supposed to be having it with, right? If
yeah.
you're in an organization and you want to create equity, if you want to make sure that you have a sense of inclusiveness, you have to actually include the people in the conversation. If
Mm-hmm.
you just have the conversation with two people, you make the decision, you're like, oh, here's equity. It doesn't really work like that, right?
Mm-mm.
Same thing in your life. If you want to have justice, if you want to have a sense of equality with your partnerships or your friendships, or even with your groups, you
Mm.
have to have those conversations. And how you talked about it, I think was really significant, was about creating that sense of vulnerability by just standing there. Like, hey,
Yeah.
I'm fragile right now. You could crush me, but please don't.
I already crushed myself anyway. That's why we're here.
Right? And I can understand honestly, and I empathize why people don't do that, because
Yeah.
that's very challenging, right? Physical pain you can heal from quick if you hit me,
Mm-hmm.
right? But if you
Mm-hmm.
crush me emotionally, might take a little bit longer to recover from. As people step into that space, I'm thinking more on the lines of intrapersonal intelligence, right?
Mm.
Getting to that side of things where now it's about the dialogue you have inside of your head. What type of work can people do there, like internally? Like would you recommend meditation,
Mm.
yoga, mindfulness, running, physical fitness, or can you talk about what you do personally
Yeah.
to get through those conversations? How do you just step into that space of fragility like that? What do you use?
I would say I'm thinking of conversations that I've had with Lena actually over the past couple of years. And there's something that we talked about, it's to feel your way into it. Because a lot of the time when we have a goal or a dream in life, we can get extremely operationally over pragmatic about it. And we're trying to rationalize our way into elevation. So I need to do this. I'm going to have a schedule for meditation, that I'm going to run, that I'm going to this, and I'm going to do that. And we have a disconnect from our body. And for me, what happened was, in the moment, let's say I encounter a moment of fragility, for example, I will focus on, okay, what is the discrepancy between how I feel right now and what I want to feel or what I deserve to feel in regards to the goal. So if what I want to happen, let's say if I hit my goal and I have this perfect, amazing relationship with so and so, how would that feel in my body? Because when you bring it back to the body, there's a shift that happens. For one, your body and your emotions will give you more information than your rationality. And many times the rationality can become a very tricky place to be when you're fragile, because that's when you will weaponize your intelligence to protect the stories that you've created against, an interaction that you had with a given person. So it can be a very dangerous place to be in, but your body doesn't lie. So when you think of, that interaction you had the other day, or that conversation with a partner, with your child, or what have you, I will feel it in my body. Like I feel tense, I feel clenched up. That's how it feels for me when I'm triggered, or I will have shaky legs, or I will feel my way into the emotion. But then once I've gone through the gamut of my emotional experience of my own fragility of the moment, I will ask myself, what do I truly want to feel that I'm not feeling right now because I have this emotional blockage or what have you? And I will let myself, it feels almost like, manifest emotionally the reality that I am building functionally, right? So if, let's say, I had this amazing relationship with my kids, what would that feel like in my body? And a lot of it is a release of tension. So I will spend time in my physicality feeling my way into the thing that I am striving towards. And that is something that you can do in many different ways, right? You mentioned meditation, you mentioned journaling. So for each one of us, it's going to feel different. But for me, it's to, it's to try to make it so that how I get to where I want to get to doesn't become a prison all of its own. That I'm not so rigid in my functioning, because let's say I get what I say I want to get, I will not even be able to experience it or be there for it. You can have all the achievements in the world and be extremely disconnected, and to have this kind of, paradoxical dichotomy in terms of externally you have manifested, but internally you haven't integrated. So for me, it's focusing on the level of emotional integration of what I truly want to experience. And because I am a very, like a somatic person, I would feel things on a deeper level in my flesh like that. And so, and even for all of us, if you take a minute and you can relive the greatest moment of shame that you've had, as if it had happened 2 seconds ago. In the same way, you can use the power of your mind to reproduce or to anticipate the emotional part of the reality that you are, striving towards. So in the same way that I can feel shame in an instant, I can also feel bliss in a minute. But most of us, again, due to conditioning, we will be very fluent in embodying the toxicity of previous moments, but we won't be as quick or imaginative when it comes to projecting ourselves into the emotional state of the life that we truly aspire, for. So that's something that I would do, and it changes it for me. Sometimes it takes a little bit more time, but ultimately, what I always get from that is I release. You don't realize how much tension is walking around in your body when you are a slave to the narratives that you pre-construct about everything and anything in your life that is a trigger for your fragility. So for me, it's always the release. I didn't realize my shoulders were so tense or my legs were so bunched up, and then when I take those moments to myself, I have a deeper level of appreciation. And it comes down to this other thing as well, is asking myself the question, in what way today do I have everything I've wished for, just in the way I least expected? And that's another question that Lena and we always go back and forth on. And I always realize that it's true. I got everything I wanted, just in exactly the opposite way I thought it should happen to me, or that it could happen to me. So it goes back again to, if I divorce myself from my ego in my story of fragility, how do I have more wholeness in me and in my life than what I've led myself to believe? So I have the job that I wanted. I created it. Doesn't feel like I thought it would. I still got the job. You know what I mean? And I feel like a lot of us can relate to that, because there's a point in time where what I'm touching and looking at was only a dream. And I am literally sitting inside of a dream that I've had. But if I'm not soaking this in, of course, everything is a trigger. Even your dream can become your greatest trigger if you are enslaved to your own, to their own fragility of your ego.
Shez, can you repeat that question that you and Lena, you guys have secrets. I didn't even know about that question. I love that. Could you repeat that question for us?
Sure. So the last one I believe is, in what way is everything that I have now exactly the thing that I wished for in the way that I least expected?
Right. So, your potential, your dreams, your
Mm,
passions are still showing up, just not in the way that you thought that they would show up. I think
yeah.
this goes back to like the principle or the main Buddhist principle of, gripping at life.
Mm,
This is what caused your suffering.
yeah.
And the moment you can find that place where you're gripping, even the tension in your body, that's where your suffering lies. And as you come up to the edge of your capacity, the other side of growth, if you feel like you're getting tense there, right, that's where your limitation is going to lie, and that's where your suffering is going to be. You just gave us an incredible way of moving through that, which is feeling it in your body, right?
Mhm.
Embodying what's happening, connecting with yourself. For myself, I do something similar, but I use breath patterns. I
Mm,
focus on the breath quite a bit. Um, Lena has to leave me in silence for a bit for me to do this every day, but I take time just to see what's happening with my breath.
mm,
And I pay close attention to it to say, okay, if I'm feeling tranquility right now, what does my breath feel like? How does my body feel with the breath? And then when anxiety comes, I can tell the difference now. And then I can say, well, can I go back to this breath and listen to someone, even though I'm being annoyed? Can I
mm,
go back to this breath, even if I'm being challenged? And right now, I want to feel tranquility because all these different states of mind, all these different emotions that we have, there's a breath that goes with it.
yeah.
And so, same thing with your body. If you can do as Shez recommended, if you can just kind of drop from your head and you know put it into your emotions a little bit and say, what am I feeling? You can feel the tensions that are happening with people around you, and you could potentially diffuse that and actually step further into your growth when you come up to a limitation, whether that be if you want to do a keynote address, you want to speak to someone that is either challenging you or verbally berating you, you need to speak up for yourself. Would that be you need to ask for a raise? Would that be you see something going wrong and you need to speak up and have some equity in your environments? I think this is a very, very solid recommendation, and I'll try to incorporate that a little bit more with my breath, dipping into the body. I want to give you the last bit of comment here as we close. This is your quotable. All right, so get ready. Get ready for your quotable. Um, how would you, in brief, describe your process
Mm.
for challenging the content of your mind and how that will help you to become, a more enhanced human being living a life on purpose?
Mm. I would say, hmm, yeah, that's a good question. I think you, the thing that you were taught to hate, once you know how you learn how to love it, I think that gives you a heightened capacity as a leader to truly defend the humanity of the people that you're called to protect and serve. So for me, for example, doing a lot of work in anti-oppression, to be able to hold in humanity somebody who identifies as a white supremacist, and it's not to say that I validate their views, but I'm not going to deny them the right to be wholly human in the process of challenging the content undermines. Because I'm not fighting the human, I'm fighting the system and the human, but that doesn't come at the cost of my humanity or theirs. So, as a thought leader, when you know how to stand for the humanity of even the people who were sent to hate you, there's a whole other spectrum of power that you get because now you are in a place where you get to impact their lives because you're no longer trying to demonize them as a means to elevate your mission. And like Brene Brown said, you understand that hate and shame and blame, for example, are not tools of social transformation. So for me, is how do I edify myself in my mission without using, tools like hatred to feel entitled in my fragility, but depowered in my capacity. So that is for me what any leader can and should do on many levels. Yeah.
You rocked it, Ches, as usual. That was a big setup. Just for example, you guys have no idea what I'm going to ask her because I don't even know. That's how we do the show. It's completely on, like feeling, what needs to be said. You don't need to necessarily have it all scripted or write it down. And I love that. Beautiful, beautiful response. For someone who is fighting systems of oppression, you don't deny the humanity of the oppressors. Wow. That's some growth right there, right? That's some growth right there. You're gonna have to step gingerly along those lines.
Yeah.
I kind of see myself moving in that same path and gingerly towing that line because I don't consider that something easy to do that you just described, to be honest. Not for me. But I think it's definitely valid if we want to, create a society that's a little bit more, has a little bit more equity, has a little bit more, the feels, the humanity inside of it instead of just rotary constructs of chasing down money. I want to just say, Shez, I really appreciate our conversation. I think we are going to start a podcast together or something like this.
Yeah.
Just based on our conversations back and forth. We could just upload the WhatsApp messages.
Yeah.
Easy. That's we got to have about 2,000 hours by now.
Oh my goodness, definitely.
Right? We got to have a lot of hours by now. We're gonna keep you in the back here for a bit as we jump off, but I just want to say seriously, thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing the space and energy. Love the hair. I love that. And please say hi to your kids. Your brother. And
Yes.
you have a beautiful family. And thank you for being a part of mine.
Oh, thank you. Likewise. My heart is so full.
Much love, Shez.
Yes.
Right. I want to share a quotable here um, that I have. It says, I know the obvious differences between each sort and type, but we are more alike, my friends, than we are unalike. We are more alike, my friends, than we are unalike. It seems challenging today to move to a space where we can really connect with our similarities instead of our differences, to say where we connect instead of where we detach from each other. But the challenge today, as you come up on that boundary, as you come up on the edge, as you come up on that challenge to understand that, more often than not, you may be in the way of your own success. And if so, can you move into possibility instead of limitations? You don't need to be improved. All that you need is already within you. Peace.